Hello, welcome back to episode 130 of the Guardian Project podcast. I'm your host, Andy, and Coyle, I have never related to a card more than I have this new card, Obsessive Collector.
Oh, yeah, no, that's a good one.
It's me personified on a blue card. It's spirit with flying, but that's obsessive collecting.
It's still, I think, in a good spirit for you being blue and flying as well.
I see what you did there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm your other host, Mike. And you know the grammar rule, I after E except after C?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the first instance of an IC manipulator.
Very good. Very good. And this is the podcast where we talk about all things Magic the Gathering,
but mostly Commander.
So we have a couple of announcements this week. The first one coming from Archidect. We now have ShareLink customizations. So when you share your Archidect deck list or the link to it, you can now specify the sorting and stacking options for the link that you generate. So if you designed your deck to be viewed a certain way with multiple categories visible, for instance, this will help convey your intentions to other users who are looking at your deck. So anyone who follows a link with a customized sort or stack setting will be presented with a dialog box from which they can immediately revert to their default settings if they choose. And you can also add your deck name to the link going forward. And this is actually really useful because I do have some decks that I use this for, like my Kaza Royal Chaser deck, where I have categories for cards that untap creatures, whereas my Sigarda Humans deck is just creatures, instant sorcery. Like, I don't have anything custom special there.
Right. I know. I like it. A lot of times when we do our deck techs, I like to customize my decks and put it in the categories that we're going to talk about it for. And even when we do patron deck techs, a lot of times our patrons send us links from Archidect and they want things sorted a certain way, explained a certain way. So very cool there. We have a pretty big announcement. If you are a patron, you know that we have been releasing monthly deck tech videos for you for over a year.
Over a year.
We went and talked to you in the Discord and asked you, what do you want to see in the future? Do you want us to keep doing this? And you said, we want streaming. We want to go back to some of the streaming that we used to do back in the middle of the pandemic. And so we are going to bring it back sometime in the new year.
And we don't know when yet.
Right.
And it's probably going to be monthly. So as much as we would love to stream every Thursday like we used to, full-time jobs make that really hard when we're not full-time content creators. And as much as I would love to do that, it's just not in the cards today.
Not in the cards. It's good.
But that was one of the reasons why we had stopped streaming was, we're not sure if this is what people want. And now we know people do want this. And we always had like 30 people hanging out with us every Thursday when we did that before. It was always fun. So we will be doing that. We have not figured out the day of the week yet. Maybe it'll be Thursday again. Right. But I'm not sure.
It will be on its own dedicated Guardian Project podcast Twitch channel. So if you have watched us in the past, you've watched on Andy's personal channel, we will now have a channel specifically for the podcast, and you'll be able to watch Andy over on Andy's channel when he goes and plays Arena and all that.
So when we post the announcements, we will need you to go follow that Twitch channel. Obviously, you're not going to see us going live if you're not following us yet. So we're going to need to do that.
Yeah.
It just didn't make sense that we were doing it on my channel at all in the first place. And we always mention that on several of our streams. One day we'll change this, and then it never happens. So we will do it now.
Yes.
We're going to do that now. And then the final announcement we have this week is actually related to MTG Arena. We are getting a new format called Alchemy. Alchemy is an arena play mode based on the standard format that incorporates new to digital Magic cards alongside rebalanced standard cards to create an ever-evolving experience for players. Basically, this format is going to have some new cards that are really going to work with digital only, where you're going and making something happen perpetually, maybe increasing power and toughness or making someone's hand size smaller. But they're also going to be changing cards' power levels by either nerfing, which is like weakening a card, or buffing a card, which is strengthening a card. In their announcements, they did say that for weakening cards, this will be their primary tool to affect the game. The nerfs are going to be aimed at cards and decks that have outsized the impact on the metagame, either through their own strength and win rate or by suppressing other strategies. Their goal of nerfing cards is to allow more strategies to compete and interact with these cards, while they hope to keep these cards relevant. And then for strengthening cards, they're going to be targeting these at popular and highly played cards that are not part of that competitive metagame. Buffs will have the goal of improving the experience and overall quality of life of those playing with these cards. and are less likely to affect the competitive metagame. So they are going to be changing some things, and actually in the announcement, and we can post these in the show notes, cards like Elrond's Epiphany and Essica's Chariot, which are dominating right now, have been changed. So Elrond's Epiphany only creates a bird token if it's foretold now. And instead of being foretold for 4 blue, it's now costing 5 blue. They're hoping that this does change it. And then Essica's Chariot is changing from crew 4 to crew 2, and from creating 2 cat tokens to 1 cat token. These are just, there's actually quite a few of these here. Yeah. Faceless Haven, Goldspan Dragon, Luminarch, Aspirant, Omnath, Locus of Creation. So I think this is their way of trying to rebalance cards that got banned. I'm not sure how I feel. I know if you follow me on Twitter, I wasn't sure if I'm a fan of this yet. I do know that from what I've read it is affecting Historic.
Right.
And there are some people that are kind of upset about that, and that this shouldn't affect Historic. It's nice to see that they're trying to show us what they would have done if they could have done it again, though.
That's very true. I do kind of like the whole rebalancing thing. I saw some concerns on Twitter where people were talking about the new cards into Alchemy being rares and mythics and eating up a lot of people's wild cards, because you can't, as far as I know, you can't open these in packs. You have to just wild card them all. The new cards from Alchemy? The new adjusted cards for Alchemy, yeah.
I think if you already have them, you just have them both now.
Okay, I thought it was if you have the Alchemy card, you have them both. And that you somehow still had to unlock the Alchemy card. But either way, I do see a lot of these changes happening to commons and uncommons. So just know that your wild cards for the common and uncommon slot are not going to be unused for the Alchemy
and
format.
If you have 9 billion common and uncommon wild cards like we do, you shouldn't be affected. You're not gonna have a problem. I always have an issue with the rares, never the mythics.
Right.
Always just the rares.
So a lot of the new cards for Alchemy, people were complaining about being rares and mythics, but just know that, this could end up being a pauper format and you don't even know it.
It could be. Also, our playmat should be in soon. So I know we mentioned that we may not have the storefront up before the end of the year, but we may now, because they were supposed to be here Thursday, then Friday, then Saturday.
They should be here tomorrow.
And that's been the case for 5 days, but it's okay.
But this one, there's geographical evidence to show.
They're in Ohio, one state away from us here in Southeast Michigan.
So they should arrive tomorrow.
Yeah. So as soon as we have them, we will put up a storefront. We'll be doing a giveaway on Twitter as well. So look forward to that. If you're a patron, you are already able to sign up at a tier. If you were not able to do that financially and you would like to purchase them in the future, they will be available.
Yes, they will.
Hopefully in the next couple of weeks. And if you want to support us, you can head to patreon.com/guardianprojectpod, donate for any dollar amount. And we're hoping in the new year to come up with a bunch of other cool ideas for swag and add those to our store as well.
Absolutely. And if you're looking for another way to support the podcast, whatever platform you're enjoying the podcast on now, if you could subscribe, rate, review, and leave comments, we would be most appreciative.
And you can find us online at theguardianprojectpodcast.com. You can find our social media on Twitter at GuardianPod, on Instagram at Guardian Project Podcast, and our gameplay videos on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/theguardianproject. And if you ever want to email us, you can email us at guardianprojectpod@gmail.com. Coyle, what are we going to be talking about this week?
This week, we are going to talk about one specific commander archetype, and that is extra combats. So we know that extra turns is a little bit similar to extra combats. So we want to really focus on extra combats, cards, and commanders that can take advantage of more than one combat in one turn.
Let's go to combat. Again. And again. All right, one more time. Let's start by looking at some of the top spells for extra combat decks. And then we're going to look at the top commanders that we see utilizing these spells. And very surprisingly, some of these commanders that are here are not ones that I was picturing to be on the top of this list based on EDHREC.com.
Right.
And actually a deck that I do have did not make the list at all. So I'm excited to talk about that towards the end of the episode. But taking a look at extra combat spells, we are going to talk about cards like Relentless Assault, which is a sorcery for 2 red that says untap all creatures that attack this turn. After this main phase, there's an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase. We have a lot of cards that are like this. Actually, there are 21 of them to be exact, in a combination of instant sorceries, enchantments, and creatures.
But I like how you started with the oldest one.
The oldest one,
originally printed in Visions in 1997. So, extra combats have been part of Magic for a very, very long time. Since I was 5 years old, personally.
And I was 9.
Right. But that's the theme that we started then, and you'll see it in every single extra combat. Well, maybe not every single extra combat card we talked about today, except for 2. They're all going to be at least red.
Correct. All of them but 2 are red. So let's jump to that real quick. The 2 that are not red are Finest Hour and Illusionist's Gambit. Finest Hour being Bant and Illusionist's Gambit being mono blue. Maybe you're in a 5-color deck that wants to go real hard and just play all of them. And I support that. I'm not sure those are the ones you want to be playing. But they do appear to be in all colors except black. We do not have an extra combat in black. But for an enchantment, we've got Aggravated Assault that lets you pay to take as many extra combats as you can afford. That is an enchantment for 2 in a red that says pay 3 red, untap all creatures you control. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase. Play this only at sorcery speed. So we are seeing this on an enchantment. And then we do have an instant if you want to walk us through Savage Beating.
Yeah, Savage Beating is a 5 mana, 3 red instant that says you can only play Savage Beating during combat, and it actually has Entwine. So you get to choose one, or if you pay the Entwine for an additional 1 in a red, you can choose both of either creatures you control gain double strike until end of turn, or untap all creatures you control, and after this phase, there's an additional combat phase. So being able to grant both double strike and an additional combat for 7 mana is pretty darn good. But this being an instant is actually extremely relevant for some combos and stuff. And since we are talking about it, I do want to roll right into Spellbinder here. Spellbinder, a 3 mana artifact equipment with imprint, where you can imprint any instant from your hand under it. And whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you get to copy the exiled card. And if you do, you may cast that copy without paying its mana cost with an equip cost of 4. So again, since Savage Beating is the only instant speed extra combat, it's actually the only spell that works with Spellbinder. I saw this when looking through the top cards, I think for Godo Bandit Warlord, because Godo's just trying to, do a lot of infinite combat stuff. So I think this is actually a pretty underutilized combo. Maybe it's because it's difficult to search for instants and sorceries in your deck. Like maybe you're not in an extra combat deck, you're not looking for a particular extra combat spell. You're looking for any extra combat spell. So looking for your one particular instant might be difficult in red. But as we're going to see here in a couple minutes, we're going to talk about some decks that might even include blue.
Yeah, and this is also the most expensive of all of the extra combat spells, being that it was only printed in Darksteel, have not seen a reprint. It is nearly $50. Oof. So of the extra combat spells, this is the one that I would probably expect to see the least, but people make up for that with the creatures that are playing with extra combat ability. So we've got the same ability to take an extra combat step after this, and then usually getting another main phase on creatures like Port Razor, Morag, Fury of Akum, Najeela, the Blade Blossom, Lightning Runner, Godo Bandit, Warlord, and Combat Celebrant. There are more. They all just do it a little differently. So Port Razor has to swing, deal damage, and then has to swing at somebody else. Morag is for landfall. Najeela can pay 5 colors. Lightning Runner cares about energy. Combat Celebrant has Exert. So they all do it a little differently. But when you're looking at a lot of these extra combat decks, they're probably running a very good combination of all of the extra combat instants and sorceries and enchantments and the creatures.
Yeah, I really do like the reoccurring extra combats that you get with Aggravated Assault, like we already talked about, and Najeela the Blade Blossom, that you could pay, as many times in one turn to get as many extra combats. But I think Seize the Day is also a very I think it's well utilized. I won't call it an underutilized card because you get 2 extra combats out of 1 card by only having to spend 7 mana in total.
Because it has flashback.
It has flashback. So it's a 4 mana sorcery. It says untap target creature. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase followed by additional main phase and flashback for 2 and a red. So as you can see, it only untaps 1 creature. So this is more suited for like a Voltron type strategy. But at the same time, it's still pretty good, and it actually is getting a very recent reprint in the new Secret Lair. Round 2 in the Arcane Secret Lair is a copy of Seize the Day.
It is, and we also have 1 Planeswalker that grants extra combats. This is Zariel, Archduke of Avernus, a Planeswalker that costs 2 red. It has +1 creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste, which is great in an extra combats deck. Has 0, create a 1/1 red devil creature token with when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. I actually also really just like those devils that ping.
Oh yeah.
And then it has a -6 for you get an emblem with at the end of the first combat phase on your turn, untap target creature you control. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase. So while it isn't all creatures, some decks only care about 1 creature swinging during these extra combats. So this effectively is going to give you a single untapped target creature and you get an extra combat. I've never seen this cast in Commander.
Nope.
Ever.
Nope.
I do think that it's really, really new. So this is from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. So it's only been out for a couple of months anyway.
It's being slotted into a lot of Zerzoth Chaos Rider decks just because it creates a devil. But I think the question that we want to ask ourselves here is, would we include this in an extra turns deck for the emblem on Zariel?
An extra turns deck?
An extra combats deck. I know we had this issue when dealing with when making the agenda for this too. I kept saying extra turns. An extra combats deck. Do you include Zariel in your deck because of the extra combat emblem?
I might, because that +1 giving your things haste, still relevant. And sometimes I just want to swing immediately with
a 4 mana, give everything you have +1/+0 and haste, I think is why I would include this coincidentally in my extra combat deck. If I get the alt, sure, but I don't have to. And the devil, just being able to protect yourself is your own Planeswalker. Very cool. I only run this in my Zerzoth deck, but I should be running it in a heck of a lot more.
Yeah, so now that we've looked at all of the types of spells and the types of creatures that are run in extra combat decks, we wanted to look at the top commanders that are played in extra combat decks. And actually the very first one, which is Atali Primal Storm, is one that I was not expecting to be on the list. And I think the reason why is I always view Atali as, although it was an Elder Dinosaur that did come out in Ixalan, this one has been printed already many times.
Oh yeah.
And as good as it is, I always feel like it's considered a meme card now. That and Zetelpa have been printed many times.
Right.
The mono white flying double striking 4/8. And not that there's anything wrong with them. I just personally always think that when a card's printed 19 times, maybe it's just a filler card.
It's the promo card in all of those Walmart boxes.
Yeah, but this card's actually very good, and I see why you'd want to run in an extra combat deck. So Atali is a 6/6 Elder Dinosaur for 4 red. It says whenever it attacks, exile the top card of each player's library, then you may cast any number of those spells from among those cards without paying their mana cost. So if you're going to take 4 or 5 combats potentially on a turn, I mean, that's the goal, right?
Sure.
With these decks, that's a lot of free cards you're going to be able to cast.
Yeah, especially if those free cards end up being some of your extra combat cards, because you get to cast your own cards from this too. Now it doesn't get to play well. I mean, it's mono red, so it doesn't have a lot of top deck manipulation outside of like Sensei's Divining Top, but hopefully getting the cards from your opponents are going to make up for that. But yeah, hitting those extra combat spells for free. How could you go wrong?
And I do like that in the notes, though, that you did write that this only gets better with your opponent's spells. You know, you could be playing a mono red combat deck and going, well, if someone's playing, I don't know, Propaganda and Ghostly Prison, it's like, crap, I don't know what to do. But if they have those, you know, they're in white and blue, maybe they're going to have really strong spells that you don't have access to.
Card draw spells.
In mono red. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or huge spells that can pump your creatures, or you get maybe a giant aura that gives your creature plus something, you know, whatever it is. Your deck only gets stronger, essentially.
You do get to cast the cards too, which is an important note for things like I don't know, Eldrazi or something like that, which you probably will also find in an Atali Primal Storm deck.
Yeah. Now, while there aren't a ton of ways in at least the Atali deck, right? So it's mono red to manipulate the top of your deck. If you are running things like maybe a Sensei's Divining Top, you can rearrange the top 3 cards that you can cast them for free. Maybe you do get an extra combat,
Absolutely.
whatever it is.
And you can fetch artifacts in red pretty easily. So you can find your top and you can wear it too.
Yeah, so I like Atali. I think the card's great, and getting 4 free spells per combat. If you take 3 combats, 12 free spells in a turn.
So let's talk about a brand new legend from this year, and we're going to add a color to some extra turns, but it's still going to be an Elder. Extra combats, but it's still going to be an Elder, just a dragon this time instead of a dinosaur, and that's Velomachus Lorehold. So for 7 mana, 5 red and a white, you get a 5/5 flying vigilance haste Elder Dragon. It says whenever Velomachus Lorehold attacks, look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may cast an instant or sorcery spell with mana value less than or equal to Velomachus Lorehold's power from among them without paying its mana cost. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So it's got haste, it's going to come out, and it's going to cast a free spell that costs 5 mana or less from the top 7 cards of your library. Which if I do a quick look at these extra turn spells, I see Fury of the Hordes is 7 mana, and maybe Lightning. No, they can't cast Lightning Runner there. Yeah, Relentless Assault you're going to be able to hit. Savage Beating you're going to be able to hit a little bit. Seize the Day you're going to be able to hit. And Waves of Aggression. Actually, our first extra combat card that includes white. Waves of Aggression is 3 red and a white that says untap all creatures that attack this turn. After this main phase, there's an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase, and this one has Retrace. First instance of Retrace I've seen on an extra combat card. So Retrace says that you can cast this card from your graveyard as long as, in addition to paying its mana cost, you discard a land card from your hand.
All day long. Get these lands out of my hand. I'll take an extra combat.
Now, you won't be able to cast this for free with Velomachus if you're casting it from your graveyard, but you're going to cast it for free once with Velomachus, and then if you don't hit an extra combat spell with Velomachus on the second attack, then you can go, okay, I get to pitch a land to cast this one again.
And you don't have to exile it. You can do it as many lands as you have and mana you have to spend it. Retrace is a very great mechanic. I would love to see that come back in the future.
Absolutely. It's it did come back a little bit in Modern Horizons 2. I think Modern Horizons 1 for sure had some Retrace in there. But I like running Retrace with a lot of my Vega cards in there. So anything with Retrace in blue-white, I like running. Always good to see it in red-white. So the other thing that white does for your extra combat decks is you get a lot of utility. You just get normal white card utility, which, for the longest time we talked about how white was a bad, quote unquote, bad monocolor. It's not anymore. It's not terrible anymore. But we can look at when you start splashing white. I mean, modern decks splash white all the time to get a lot of these really good spells. You have Smothering Tithe, Esper Sentinel for your brand new card draw in white, Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshare for removal, Keeper of the Accord, Knight of the White Orchid, and Land Tax for ramp. So even adding white is actually going to help you ramp in what normally would be a only red deck.
Yeah, I like adding these. I do like the addition of Smothering Tithe. I think that in Boros decks, especially when you need a lot of mana for an extra combat deck, that would be really great to have. And another one that I hadn't thought of was Velomachus Lorehold, only because it's been out for less than a year.
Right.
Strixhaven hasn't even been out for a full. Maybe it's been out for a full year. Has it been out for a full year?
I think it came out this year.
It came out this year. So another commander making the top of this list that I was not expecting.
Right. There is one other red and white extra turn cards that we saw reprinted recently. Response Resurgence, actually a split card. So the response side, red and white, hybrid. Response deals 3 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. Not the important side, but Resurgence, 3 red, white. Sorcery, creatures you control gain first strike and vigilance until end of turn. After this main phase, there's an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase. Now, this particular one does have a mana value of 7, so it's going to be harder for Velomachus to actually be able to cast it since he only has a power of 5. But maybe in your Velomachus deck, you're running some things to make him a little bit more powerful. Maybe you have a Morog in the 99 that's going to, slowly give him +1/+1/+1 every single time you do an extra combat. Being able to cast Resurgence for free.
Yeah. So the next commander is Tovalar, Dire Overlord. So again, we're seeing another new hotness commander from Innistrad Midnight Hunt. So I made a werewolf deck. I did not include any extra combat cards. Although I can see why it would be beneficial. They do flip back to the human side in most cases. When you pass your turn, at least from my experience, I've been able to spend mana to cast 2 spells, someone before me is. The nice thing is that as long as you have three werewolves, wolves or werewolves, Tovalar flips them back. But this gives you access to red and green. Tovalar is a 3/3 for 1 red green that says whenever a wolf or werewolf you control deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more wolves or werewolves, you transform all of them and then it becomes night. And then on Tovalar's flip side, it's a werewolf. It's a 4/4 that says whenever a wolf or werewolf deals damage to a player, you draw a card. And then it has pay X, a red and a green. Target wolf or werewolf you control gets +X/+O and gains trample until end of turn. So this is a deck that wants to be swinging. So it makes perfect sense that you're adding extra combat cards to this deck. I see on the notes you wrote Gruul Edric.
It feels so much like Edric.
Kind of, but only for you though, not for anyone else.
Well, I'm saying that you're not taking extra turns, you're taking extra combats,
right?
And your creatures, when they deal damage, are drawing cards. But you mean with Edric not having the
the group ability for everyone else to feel like it, but it does. This does feel very much like that. So when I swing and I deal damage, a lot of my creatures already have trample. There's werewolves that say other werewolves you control have trample now. So I mean, we've got all of this built into the werewolf tribal deck now. It does take advantage of drawing cards. Unless you do have an Immerwolf, it's going to flip back today. But in extra combats, if you've already made it night, who cares?
Well, that's true. I also decided to throw another combo on here in case you wanted to keep your wolves into werewolves all the time. If you put Moon Mist, which is an instant that turns all humans into werewolves, and it costs 2 mana under an Isochron Scepter because you're allowed to, because it's a 2 mana instant, in combination with a Seedborn Muse that untaps all your permanents on every other person's turn, you can always turn your guys back into werewolves in case they get turned into humans on other people's turns.
I actually don't dislike the idea of adding Isochron Scepter because of the number of instants that I think I'm already playing in my werewolf deck, like cards that are just making creatures fight at instant speed. I'm already doing that because that's my removal that I'm using in this creature based deck. I think I'm running a Blast Mist deck. I'd have to take a look, but Isochron Scepter actually does seem pretty solid with the Moon Mist stuck under it. And that's your Gruul extra combat deck.
Got to make it happen. Now, speaking of Gruul and speaking of new hotness, let's just continue this trend and we'll talk about the MTG Chad, as some call him. Wolfgar of Icewind Dale. For 5 mana, 3 a red and a green, you get a human barbarian 4/4 with the melee keyword. This is whenever this creature attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each opponent you attack this combat. And it says that if a creature you control attacking would cause a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So I think it makes sense. You're doubling your combat triggers, so you want to do as many combats as possible. This is really going to take advantage of a lot of the cards that are getting additional effects as they attack, and then having them compound into bigger and bigger attacks. So Blossoming Bog Beast is the card that I was looking at that gives a pump to your entire team based on how much life you've gained this turn. So at the beginning of your combat, you gain 2 life, and then your team gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the amount of life you gained. So at first you're going to gain 2 and then gain another 2, and all of your creatures are going to get +6/+6. And then on your second combat, they're going to get an additional +14/+14. So your second combat, all your creatures have +20/+20. And all of your other creatures are going to be double triggering with Wolfgar as much as the Blossoming Bog Beast is going to. So I think that this commander has not been out long enough to be fully realized, but at the same time it might just be like a win more kind of card because you're just doubling your triggers. But I think it's too powerful to just call it that.
I've already lost to this card.
Okay.
So I have played against Wolfgart of Icewind Dale. It was actually just within, I would say, the last month. So as soon as we talked about the fact that there were a lot of commanders that we hadn't seen played, I immediately had a bunch of people say, oh, well, I'll bring this deck out because you haven't played against it yet. So that was great. But now that I've been going to our LGS on Sundays, I've been able to see a lot of decks that are not in our little online group or through our Discord friends.
Yep.
And Wolfgar was one of them. And they were, I mean, I think we got destroyed by an Ulamog that was doubling.
Oh,
so we were exiling top 40 cards of our library when it swung.
Beautiful.
There was no coming back, but it was glorious to see. So Wolfgar is a very good commander for extra combats. Again, a lot of these commanders are still so new. I hadn't thought of them as extra combats.
Yeah. I think if you look at some of the combos maybe that people do in extra combats and try to figure, what commanders are going to be best for it. I know one particular combo for infinite extra combats that a lot of people have been running for a long time is Savage Ventmaw combined with Aggravated Assault. So we've talked about Aggravated Assault a lot, but Savage Ventmaw is a 6 mana 4/4 dragon, 4 red and green, so you need to be in at least Gruul to run it. Flying says whenever Savage Ventmaw attacks, add red, 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 green, green, green until end of turn. You don't lose this mana as steps and phases ended. And as you can probably guess, you're going to use 5 of that mana into Aggravated Assault. Being able to take an extra turn, and you get 1 floating mana after that, either in red or green. But in combination with Wolfgar, you're going to have 7 floating mana. You're going to be able to do a lot more than just 1 mana at a time. A lot of times, extra combat decks have trouble because they can get through one opponent, but they can't get through the second and third opponent because they have blockers or they have a ghostly prison up or something like that. So being able to ramp out your mana much, much faster could be beneficial for you. So again, I think there's a lot of untapped potential here with Wolfgar.
So speaking of ramping up your mana very quickly, I did run into that with a deck that I want to jump to, which is on this list, Ryona Fire Dancer. It is my current extra combat deck. Ryona Fire Dancer coming from a commander set from this current year. It is a 3/4 human wizard for 3 red, red. It says at the beginning of combat on your turn, create X tokens that are copies of another target creature you control, where X is 1 plus the number of instants and sorceries you've cast this turn. They gain haste, exiling them at the beginning of the next end step. So this actually came out with the Strixhaven Commander decks. This was in the, I believe it was the Zephi Thunder Collector or Thunder Conductor deck.
Yep.
So I pulled this out. This one, it called to me. I really wanted to play with this card. And initially when I built it, it's a 5 mana value commander that requires that you have a creature out that you can copy because they're not going to copy themselves.
Right.
And you have to have also cast spells before it. So there's like a lot of setup required for Ryona. And so I said, well, I'm afraid I might just get blown out of the water. So I had a mana vault and I own a Grim Monolith. And I went into it saying, I have these in here because Ryona costs 5. And if you remove her once and then twice, I'm almost out of the game is what my initial thought was. I built an extra combat combo deck is what I ended up building. After I played it a few times, I realized the win rate was way too high. So I pulled a bunch of those cards out of here. But I run it because you're taking advantage in this deck specifically of enter the battlefield abilities and not necessarily the swinging abilities. Whereas we just saw Wolfgar is going to double and make your creatures larger in most instances. Ryona just cares about getting a bunch of little things. So I built mine focusing on things like Storm Kiln Artist. So whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you create a treasure token. So if you can make a bunch of Storm Kiln Artists and then cast an instant or sorcery, you can get a bunch of treasures, which then sets you up for further turns down the road. Not having issues with your mana. Bergi, God of Storytelling. You can play the Horn of Harnfell and get extra cards in red.
Absolutely.
I'm running Runaway Steamkin, which is giving you more mana, and they're getting larger. Some of the win conditions here are Combustible Gearhulk.
I've lost to that.
You have. Mike did lose to that. He did not realize that there is a sorcery that you can cast by exiling 2 red cards from your hand to take an extra combat. So I think in that game I made almost 18 combustible gear hulks.
Yeah, I mean, I would have died if I would have taken
sure,
like 3 of them in damage. So maybe I could have taken 2, but I wasn't gonna.
Yeah, Fury of the Horde, very great. We didn't talk about that one, but it's actually a free extra combat spell. It costs 5 red, so I mean it does cost 7, but it says you may exile 2 red cards from your hand rather than pay Fury of the Horde's mana cost. And it just does the same thing. Untap all your creatures. After this main, there's an additional combat phase, followed by an additional main phase. So I do like playing this Ryona deck. It is currently assembled with all of these cards in it. I think it puts on a good show because it plays extra combats a little differently.
Yeah. We just mentioned in the Wolfgart talking about compounding benefits from combats. Ryona does get to do that. The copies of the creatures that Ryona makes, they stay until the end of turn and not until the end of combat.
Right.
Unlike the extra combats deck that I built, Delina Wild Mage, also brand new from AFR. For 3 and a red, you get an Elf Shaman 3/2. This is the one that you get to roll d20s with, which is why I wanted to build it. So when Delina Wild Mage attacks, choose target creature you control, then roll a d20. On a roll of 1 to 14, you just make 1 copy of it. On 15 to 20, you make a copy and roll again. Could go infinite. It technically, statistically, it could. It doesn't. But you lose these copies at the end of combat with Delina versus Ryona, where you keep them until the end of turn. So Delina is what I call a worse version of Ryona, because Ryona doesn't have to swing and Delina does. So being that 4 mana instead of 5 mana really doesn't help you that much because you're still delayed by a turn. And honestly, the 2 toughness is so tough to get around with Delina. That deck has been taken apart for me. If you are going to run an extra combats deck and your sole purpose is not to roll d20s, I don't recommend building Delina personally.
Yeah, but there is another mono red deck that we can talk about that has actually been featured on one of our streams and doesn't have to be built specifically around extra combats. It just does it on its face, which is Maraga, Fury of Akum. So Maraga is a 6/6 Minotaur warrior that we mentioned earlier when we mentioned the extra combat creatures. It costs 4 red and says each creature you control gets +1/+0 for each time it has attacked this turn. It has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if it's your main phase, there's an additional combat phase after this phase. At the beginning of that combat, untap all creatures you control. So we did have our patron Dan Kraus come on stream with us when we did a budget build for Zendikar Rising Commanders. So I think I was playing blue-red wizards. You were playing green-red landfall.
Yep.
He was playing this mono-red Maraga deck, but it was goblins. So it was just a bunch of little 1/1 do nothing things.
Yep.
But then when you have 4 combats in a turn, they get +1/+0 each time they've attacked. And if someone, like me, didn't have many creatures out, they just got destroyed.
Well, that's true.
Because they swing for 1, then 2, then 3, and that compounding increase to their power every time they attack was crazy. And in colorless, you have things like Walking Atlas, where you can just put a land onto the bat. I mean, in colorless, you can go get lands. So it's not like you always have to have Cultivate or Rampant Growth or what have you. This is a crazy extra combats deck.
Yeah.
I love it.
I mean, this thing even turns Evolving Wilds into 2 extra combats.
It does. So if you're not playing Maraga as the commander, you can do that. If you're playing it in a red-green deck.
Evolving Wilds? You can run
Evolving Wilds. I'm sorry. I thought you said Cultivate.
Oh, no, sorry.
Yeah, no. So, but yeah, Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse.
Myriad Landscape will do
Fabled
it too.
Passage. Yeah. Any fetch land that you're running that can grab red.
Right, because fetch lands don't have color identity.
Now, just make sure, though, that you're not like me and you play your land at the right time on that turn, because you do have to play it. You want to do second main phase, not first main phase.
Yes.
Because if you do it first main phase, your creatures aren't going to untap.
Right. if you somehow have given vigilance to your whole party and you need to put the land main phase 1,
then go for it.
Then you could. That's the only time.
All creatures have vigilance. Otherwise, don't do it, because you'll see that you've done biffed it, like did. I've done. This deck though can be made very affordably, and Maraga is like $5 now. I remember I thought this card was going to be crazy, but $5 isn't nothing but $5 is so affordable for extra combats.
Yeah, it's got three different printings, I think, and then the collector's boosters were opened a lot from the Zendikar set for the special expedition land.
Yeah.
They're not expeditions, but you know what I mean.
Yeah,
the box topper lands.
Yeah, I mean they were originally the expeditions. The second time we went to Zendikar, so everybody wanted those fancy fetch lands.
Yeah,
is what we were looking for.
So I do think Maraga is going to go up in price later on, but right now there's so many of them out there. That
not a finance podcast.
No, we're all
don't blame us.
We're not a finance podcast. But let's talk about blue, because we haven't really talked about blue yet, and there is at least one deck on here that includes blue, and it's partners. So let's talk about Paco and Halden. So this is
I thought you were setting me up for the salty Narset Enlightened Master extra combat deck, and I was like, oh no, I'm grinning here and then slightly frowning, going, oh no, he's gonna make me do it on the podcast. And then when you said Halden and Paco, you threw me. It was an array of emotions that I just went through here.
Hey, we got at least another 20 minutes to get to Narset. Don't worry about that. So Paco and Halden, really the important part here is going to be Paco, Arcane Retriever. So for 3, a red and a green, you get an Elemental Hound 3/3 that has Partner with Halden and haste. It says whenever Paco, Arcane Retriever, attacks, exile the top card of each player's library and put a fetch counter on each of them. Put a +1/+1 counter on Paco for each non-creature exiled this way. So very similar to Atali's ability, but it doesn't say you can actually cast the spells, because Halden actually says you may play non-creature cards that are exiled with fetch counters on them if they're in exile, and you may spend mana as though or mana of any color to cast those spells. So you will have to cast the spells, and you're going to have both creatures out on the battlefield in order to do so. But you get access to both green and blue here, which can be very, very important. I mean, just for the protection aspect of it, you get counter spells, you get Cyclonic Rift, you get bounces, you get tap spells. But you can also get a couple spells that grant unblockable. Something like Aqueous Form, an enchantment. It says target creature gets +1, or the enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and is unblockable. Which is, going to be really important for some of your creatures that say, when they deal damage, you get to take extra combats like Portraiser. So you also get some spells that copy spells in blue. We had some copy spells in red. I didn't see them run a whole lot in the extra combat deck. I actually am curious if you run the copy spells in Ryona, because they would, not only are they copying your extra turn spells, but they're giving you extra stacks for the Ryona triggers. But blue, you get Twin Cast, you get Expansion Explosion, and a few other copy spells. And I know I've mentioned it a few times before mistakenly, but you can take extra turns as well in blue.
You can, in fact, do that. And after this, we'll talk about the next one that is probably everyone's least favorite, Narset Enlightened Master.
Oh, yeah.
But taking extra turns with extra combats is pretty strong. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to jump us right down to Narset Enlightened Master and start off by saying I'm sorry to everyone who did play against that deck. It is one of those decks where I did have to just say I can't run this because it just draws too much hate, deservedly.
Sure.
It's hard to interact with Narset. And Narset usually is running something to give it haste immediately. If you're running extra combats, you're probably running a lot of big spells that are probably going to do a lot for you.
Oh, yeah.
But I think most Narset decks run a few extra combats, but a few extra turn spells. So it kind of just happens. But Narset's a 3/2 human monk for 3 blue, red, white. It has first strike and hexproof, and says when Narset Enlightened Master attacks, exile the top 4 cards of your library. Until end of turn, you may cast non-creature cards exiled with Narset this turn without paying for their mana costs. Narset Enlightened Master is also on the salt scale. It's very upsetting for people to play against this card. It can run all of our extra combat spells, except I guess the one Bant spell, because we're not in greens.
That's correct.
But you can at least run Illusionist Gambit.
You can.
But you've got Waves of Aggression, Fury of the Horde, Seize the Day, Savage Beating, which can be cast at instant speed for free during combat, because Narset exiles those cards during combat.
Yes.
World at War, Relentless Assault, but then the problem is when you run into the Beacon of Tomorrows and Temporal Mastery extra turn spells that you're playing for free, and then you might be suiting Narset up with like Steel of the Godhead, giving it +2/+2 lifelink and unblockable, or even a free Eldrazi conscription, giving it +10/+10 trample and Annihilator 2. The games end pretty quickly. And unless you have an answer for the Narset coming down, or maybe a way to force someone to sacrifice it, because Narset is usually the only creature someone has with the Narset deck. It's extremely powerful. It is not on the top of the list anymore, and I think it's probably because people are shying away from that. I could be wrong. I'm making lots of assumptions here, but if I were betting on this, I would say it's been out for a very long time. Khans of Tarakir came out many years ago, and we like to see the new stuff.
Yeah, it does feel a lot. Just reading the card and what it does, it looks a lot like Velomachus Lorehold on its front, because Velomachus is going to dig 7, but you only get to cast 1 card, and it has a restriction of what that mana value of that card could be. Where Narset, it's 4, you can cast any of them. All of them, in fact.
You can cast all of them
for free, but you only get to look at 4 instead of 7.
I think I'm going with the 4 over the 7.
I would go over the 4 over the 7.
And Narset costs 1 less mana.
One less mana.
6, although it's 3 colors.
Doesn't have haste, but has hexproof.
And that is crazy.
It's crazy good.
It's crazy good. We've never really said many nice things about the next commander, which is Najeela the Blade Blossom. It's just a very strong deck. You can build it budget, you can build it expensive, and it just kind of steamrolls.
It's the only commander on this particular list that can play every single extra turn spell, because Najeela is extra combat spell, because Najeela is a 5-color identity commander, because of her activated ability that allows you to untap all attacking creatures. They gain trample, lifelink, and haste until end of turn, and after this phase there's an additional combat phase. Now you have to pay Wooburg in order to activate that 1 color of every type, but it's really easy to do in a 5-color deck with combos, and if you're building Najeela, you probably have a strong mana base, and you're probably accidentally going to combo, because budget Najeela decks are still very strong.
Yeah. Now, can we talk about the deck that I did run and it didn't make this. It didn't make this list at all. It doesn't even appear here, which is my Zindersplit and Okan coin flip deck.
Absolutely.
It does not appear on here. So Zindersplit and Okan are from Battle Bond. We are also seeing a secret layer with this, and it is not. I don't believe, and I think I looked through the list. It's not an extra combat deck.
No.
The way that I built it, though, I did build it as extra combat. So they are partners. Zindersplit is a 1/4 for 5 that says whenever a player wins a coin flip, you draw a card. And then Okan is a 3/3 for 5 that has whenever a player wins a coin flip, double Okan's power and toughness until end of turn. And they both say at the beginning of combat, end of turn, flip a coin until you lose a flip. So, drawing cards is great. And then having a 3/3 that just grows is fantastic. Now, it doesn't have haste. It doesn't have trample. It doesn't have evasion. It doesn't have any of that. But all of that is available on a ton of equipment.
Oh yeah.
On auras that grant things haste, on lands that grant things haste,
creatures in your graveyard, just
very angry creatures.
Yes.
Their anger, and there's anger in your graveyard. As long as you have a mountain, you can have haste for Okan. So I built Zindersplit and Okan as an extra combat deck because if you win, is it 5 flips? So 6, 12, 18. If you win 4 flips and you have a way to give it either unblockable or trample, depending on the toughness of whatever the creatures they have are, you only have to deal 21. So 6, 12, 18. Oh, no, it's bigger than 18. It's not 24. I was multiplying by 6. That was
6,
wrong.
12, 24. 3 times.
6, 12, 24. So 3 coin flips. I'm not the math person. Okay, here. Math is for coin flippers. Oops, that's me. So 3 coin flips, and you take somebody out with commander damage.
Yeah.
And Okan works very, very well with Access Tunnel.
That's
and
true.
Rogue's Passage.
Also true.
And anything that gives a creature trample. So this was my extra combat deck of choice for a long time until I wanted to try out Ryona. But Zindersplit and Okan they're still, it's fully assembled. I just
Mhm.
need to move the 8 or 9 cards
Sure.
back over to it. And I'm
And-
not taking it apart because it's fun to do.
And,
It's fun to play.
and you got to buy a new Hotness Krark's Thumb when it's available. A
And
double-sided
the
Krark's
Zindersplit and
Thumb, of
Okon
course.
double-sided, so this is, and I was surprised. This is the one I was fully expecting to be on there, but
Yeah.
apparently I'm the hipster playing.
Well, yeah. I mean, we've been sounding maybe a little bit like a broken record, but the whole cumulative benefit of having extra combats rather than just extra turns with Okon, doubling power. Oh, new combat, 2 more coin flips. Let's double the power at least one more time statistically. And then, with 3 coin flips and a three successful coin flips and a Chandra's Ignition, everyone's dead.
Yeah, Chandra's Ignition does do it too. So now that we've talked about some of the top commanders, we do have some cards for you to consider to include in your extra combat decks. And one of them is very popular, at least for the Wolfgart deck, but it does not list it in all of these decks. But that is Unnatural Growth, an enchantment for 1 green, 5 total mana. At the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. That's fantastic. That fits perfectly into Wolfgar of Icewind Dale, Xenagos, God of Revels. We did not mention that, although it is in the top list.
It's a Gruul extra combat deck that pretty much is doing the same thing as a lot of the other Gruul extra combat.
So we wanted to talk about Wolfgar, but they're very similar, and I bet both fit into each other's deck perfectly.
For sure. Xenagos in particular, giving everything or giving one creature +X where X is equal to its power at the beginning of combat, and Unnatural Growth doubling, you're going to be double. You're going to be 4 times the power at the beginning of combat for any one of your creature in a Xenagos deck. And again, cumulative, you're going to double the creature this combat, double it again next combat, double again the combat afterwards. We did talk about a little bit the infinite combo with Aggravated Assault and Savage Ventmaw. There are some other creatures that have been printed since Savage Ventmaw that are going to also be able to help you. The new Rada that actually produces mana based on how many creatures you have attacking. If you have a wide enough board attacking, you'll be able to do that. But your Twitter name for a long time, Old Gnawbone,
Andy Flory, Old Gnawbone,
is another one that can do it, because Old Gnawbone already starts off as 7 power, dealing damage. You're going to get 7 treasures. 7 treasures is 2 more than you need to be able to activate your Aggravated Assault trigger on your enchantment and take an extra combat after that. So you'll not only be able to go infinite, but be able to go infinite and have infinite of any color mana that you could possibly want, as long as there's not a collector oof somewhere on the battlefield making it so you can't activate your artifacts.
Exactly. Well, and I also like cards like Goreclaw, Terra of Kalsisma. It says whenever Goreclaw attacks, each creature you control with power 4 or greater gets +1/+1 and gains trample. So if you're taking multiple combats, they're getting that +1 each time. Again, that compounding power and toughness is fantastic. Again, you have to be in green, but there are quite a few of these extra combat decks that do run green.
Yeah, I mean, we already talked about a ton of them with Gruul in there. I mean, Wolfgar seems to be, some of the new hotness. There's actually another commander from the same deck that Wolfgar came from, and that's Klauth Unrivaled Ancient, who people are talking as the legendary Savage Ventmaw. So it's a 7 mana 4/4 with flying and haste. It says whenever Klauth Unrivaled Ancient attacks, add X mana in any combination of colors where X is the total power of attacking creatures. Spend this mana only to cast spells. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. So unfortunately, this isn't going to produce mana that you can pay into your enchantment to take infinite combats with Aggravated Assault, but you can use this to cast your other extra combat spells. Or if you have a doubling cube, technically the mana the doubling cube makes doesn't have the restriction.
True.
So you could pay it into your enchantment at that point.
That's true. So final thoughts on extra combat decks. I like these. It feels like these types of decks give the player and the people in the pod a combination of both kind of a combo centric deck versus a deck that's winning solely off of combat, which obviously there's a lot of turmoil in what is considered recently casual, but I think an extra combat deck, a lot of people would say that a more social casual deck that you sit down and just play with friends is likely going to focus on combat damage, swinging out. I like this as that deck because it gives me an ability to maybe chain some things, which feels combo-y,
sure,
but also take people out in a way that they feel that they have an ability to participate, blocking, removing creatures. Because
Sure.
if you can remove my creatures, I can take 6 combats with no creatures and
Oh,
I
yeah.
can't do anything.
For
right.
sure.
So I think this falls solidly into the this is an enjoyable deck that people like to play with and against. And I like those themes
For
when
sure.
someone's playing a deck. So I vote, please play more extra combat spells, because I think they can win games out of nowhere when it's
Oh, for sure.
unexpected.
Absolutely, they can, especially late game when there's only like 1 or 2 people left in the game. One extra combat spell in there randomly is going to do it for you.
Exactly.
I like extra combat spells too. I think it feels a lot better when someone stacks 7 extra combats than when someone stacks 7 extra turns.
Yes.
I know I'm not going to be sitting there forever and maybe still playing this game. But
Exactly.
when someone stacks 7 extra combats, I'm like, all right, time to die.
Wait, turns.
When someone stacks extra combats, it's time to die. No, when someone stacks extra
Oh,
turns,
I guess it is
it's
time to
for
die.
me to sit there and do nothing
Or it's time
for a
for
very
me to
long
die,
time.
because you're like, wow, I'm dying inside.
Yeah, dying IRL instead of.
And if you at the end of this episode aren't sure if it was about combats or turns, neither are we.
Yeah, please
It was
count how
about
many
combats.
times that I got it wrong.
Okay,
And
if you do
comment
that,
on it.
we will send you a prize. If you tweet at us or comment on our video how many times Coyle said turns instead of combats.
Yes, it has to be the proper wrong times, because that last one was correctly extra combats instead of turns. So every wrong one only, and I will be the judge.
And you can tweet that at us at I'm on Twitter at Andy Flory.
And I'm on Twitter at WormCoilEngine. And just like we do at the end of all of our videos, episodes, we want to give a special thanks to Ryan Nichols, our producer and editor. Thank you so much for everything you do. And Chris Wolf, who handles all of our graphic design. Thank you for everything that you do. And for all of you listening out there struggling to listen to me figure out the difference between an extra combat and an extra turn, we'll talk to you next week.
During our next combat phase. Next turn.
Next turn.
Oh no.